Well, the way these things go, Carl, at a certain point, the story cracks market confidence, and that's what happened this week. But I think this is quite a manageable situation. Whether the payment is made or not, Carl, I mean, the fact is that Evergrande needs a major restructuring of its debt. I think there can be no avoidance of that. And I seriously doubt that the Chinese government will step in for the bulk of this debt. It's a manageable proposition in part, Carl, because, yes, we're looking at the numbers are big at first glance, $300 billion. But then when you slice them up, you see that the amount of offshore dollar-denominated debt is less than $20 billion. Much of this is in the hands of Chinese institutional, and unfortunately, some of it in the hands of Chinese retail investors. There will need to be a reckoning. The chickens will need to come home to roost. But I can see a reasonably orderly process unfolding after this highly disruptive period.
Charles, it's Morgan. In terms of institutional investors, you have a number of foreign companies and firms and investors that have exposure too, including some here in the U.S. I mean, obviously, I think anybody digging into the financials of the company over recent months has probably seen those red flags. So why that exposure? And I guess just as importantly, if China's going to be protecting domestic investors, is that going to be at the expense of the international ones?
Well, it is likely that in the end, the international investors will take a much more serious hit than the domestic investors. That's just the nature of debt restructuring in this global world, to be honest with you. After all, the amount of international exposure is actually quite manageable. And as has been said already, I think, on your show this week, there have to be some consequences for the creditors here. They knew the risk. These are highly professional investors, and they knew the risk that they were dealing with here. I think that the situation is different, though, when it comes to the Chinese retail investors, many of whom bought into wealth management products that they most likely didn't fully understand. We've seen this in many restructurings in the past. I can think of the Italian pensioners who bought into Argentinian debt 20 years ago. And most often, solutions are found to at least cushion the blow to those investors.